Hi, I'm Kaja.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Warhammer Diskwars is a tactical wargame with a unique movement system from Christian T. Peterson, Tom Jolly, and Fantasy Flight Games.
In Warhammer Diskwars, players control a small army of warriors and wage war on their opponents. It supports from 2 to 4 players and lasts about an hour. There are 2 expansions, Hammer and Hold and Legions of Darkness, each of which add 3 new races and new mechanics.
So players begin Diskwars by marking out a 3x3 foot battlefield, sorting the tokens, and placing them next to it. Each player builds an army of 1 or more regiments and collects its discs and command cards. Players roll a die to determine initiative order, and the last player draws 2 scenario cards and chooses one. Its scenario ability is going to stay in play for the duration of the game. The remaining scenario cards are shuffled and dealt out, and then each player will score points at the end of the game according to their card's objective, which is kept secret.
Each player takes as many deployment cards as they have regiments, and, in reverse player order, places them along their edge of the board to create deployment zones. Then, players place 1 terrain piece each in reverse initiative order. Finally, in reverse initiative order, players deploy a number of discs equal to the deployment values listed on their deployment cards. The special ability of each deployment card applies to all discs in its zone, and undeployed discs are left in reserve. Then the game begins.
So each round of Diskwars consists of 3 phases: activation, melee, and the end phase. At the start of the activation phase, each player plays 1 command card from their hand face down on the table. Cards are revealed simultaneously and then resolved in order of strategy. So bold cards go before steady cards, which go before devious cards, which go before bold cards, and slow cards go last. The strategies are always ordered with reference to the first player, and any ties are broken by initiative.
A player resolves a card by activating the number of discs listed in its upper left. Activating a disc lets you either move it, resolve an ability, make a ranged attack, or pass. To move a disc, a player flips it up to a number of times equal to its movement value. If the disc overlaps an enemy disc or a piece of rough terrain, it must stop.
If a disc has a focus ability or a magic ability listed on it, then it can use that ability as its activation. If a disc lists a ranged attack, then it can attack 1 target within its listed range and within line of sight by rolling the number of dice listed on its disc.
Each hit deals the amount of damage listed on the disc. Each miss has no effect. Critical hits deal damage and place an activation token on the target disc. A chaos result has no effect unless the attacking disc has a chaos ability, and a scatter result forces you to re-roll that die against the disc nearest the target within short range.
After a disc has been activated, an activation token is placed on top of it, and it can't be activated again that round. Discs pinned underneath enemy discs cannot be activated. Now, command cards also have a special effect that either applies to all discs that card activates, or, if it lists a specific disc type, has a one-time effect on a single disc.
If a player has undeployed discs left in reserve, they can activate them with command cards. A reserve disc is placed into its player's deployment zone as its activation action.
After all players have used their command cards, they discard their resolved card. Now, players are going to continue to choose, resolve, and discard their command cards until either all of the discs on the battlefield are pinned or activated, or everybody's run out of cards.
Next, players resolve melee combat between any discs that are engaged, which occurs when 1 disc pins another. The disc on top deals damage according to its black attack value, and the disc underneath deals damage according to its white counter value. If a disc takes damage equal to or greater than its toughness, it takes a wound. If a disc takes a number of wounds greater than its stamina value, it is removed from the game. Most discs have a stamina of 0.
Now, a disc is only engaged with other discs it pins directly. If you end up with a stack of 3 or more discs, then all of the engagements within it are resolved separately from the top down. Each disc can only deal damage to one other disc within a single engagement. and if at any point a player runs out of discs, they're eliminated.
Many discs will have special abilities that affect how they move, deal damage, or attack. And terrain also has an impact on movement, cover from ranged attacks, and line of sight.
After melee combat is resolved, players remove all of the tokens except for wounds from their discs, they take back their command cards, and a new round begins. The game ends after 5 rounds, and whichever player has collected the most victory points from their secret objective is the winner. If all but one player has been eliminated, then the last player standing wins.
So Warhammer Diskwars is a fantasy flight game. Now, fantasy flight games usually come with a whole lot of complexity, but that's not the case here. This game is actually quite simple to learn, it's quite quick to set up and quick to play, which is very nice. Also, there's a lot of variability here. There's 4 different armies that you can play. Each of them has a slightly different look, slightly different feel, slightly different art, which is fantastic. They've also added something really nice here, which I like in any game that I've played that has this addition, which is secret objectives. So everybody has sort of a different goal. Nobody quite knows what everybody else is trying to do. It adds a nice level of sort of the unknown, of mystery. Everybody's trying to cover themselves on a bunch of different levels. Unfortunately, in this case, it feels like they didn't really do that as well as they could have. A lot of the objectives are pretty much the same, so they've got this sort of really nice mechanical addition, but they really haven't used it strongly, which is a real shame, because I think that if they'd made the mechanics so that they could accommodate a lot of really interesting secret objectives, then it would have added even more strength to this game.
So my big complaint about Diskwars is unfortunately that unique movement system it has. I really appreciate that they tried to move away from a rigid hex or grid-based format and to add a little bit more fluidity, but I don't think it quite works, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all, whenever you flip your disc, if you're on a surface that isn't like a rougher tablecloth or felt, the bottom edge of your disc is going to slide around just a bit, which means you lose precision in your movement. You might end up being off by anywhere from a millimeter to like half a centimeter by the end, and that can make the difference between a successful and a failed attack, which is really frustrating. The second and larger problem is the pinning mechanic. It's cool flavor-wise that when you land on top of another guy, you're attacking them, but in effect, especially if you've got a larger disc pinning a smaller one, you often end up completely obscuring that disc's stats. That makes it really hard to plan your next moves, because if you're going to try to, maneuver around something or decide if you're going to continue past it if you have the ability to do so, it would really be nice to be able to see its statistics and decide if you can actually fight it. It also makes the resolution of fights really frustrating because you have to physically lift your disc up off of the one you're attacking to see what's underneath in order to resolve things, and then very carefully put it back down so that you don't ruin its placement and screw up your movement for the next turn. If this game had added reference cards for the units, it would have really solved that problem for me and been so much stronger for it. As it is, the movement just really distracts from my enjoyment of the game. And that's unfortunate because the game has a lot of potential. I think there's a good amount of tactical depth here, especially for something that's so fast and light. The differences between the armies mean that you do have to adapt your strategy based on who you're fighting. You do have to treat your objectives a little bit differently. The terrain really does change things up. There's a lot of things that you have to react to on a tactical level, while the deployment zones, as well as your own secret objectives and the overall scenario goals, do give you some really nice room for longer term strategy, and that's great to see in a shorter and lighter game. It does also scale pretty well from 2 all the way up to 4 players. A 2-player game does feel a little bit tighter and more focused. A 4-player game is a little bit more chaotic and crazy, but they do still feel equally strong, and that's a really nice thing to see in a genre that doesn't always scale that well. Specific discs listed, specific discs listed, specific discs listed, specific discs listed.